We very much want to get to the Q&A portion of our session today, but I want to talk about three things rather informally. One is to talk about the nature of the world that we are in and we see coming down the pike over the next couple of decades. Secondly, to talk about the way to think about defense spending, which I think the key question is, what can we afford? Can we afford the military that we think we need to achieve the goals that we need to, that we want to see for the world and for the role of the United States in the world, which Mackenzie began talking about. And finally, I do want to talk a little bit about the politics of the defense spending issue, not in the sense of separating one side from the other, but in the sense that we need to have this discussion. This discussion has been too long postponed, and in particular, with the prospect of some new conservative majorities on Capitol Hill. Why should conservatives care about this issue? We are not really ideological organizations, but we're all sort of conservative by mindset. So why have the three of us come together, particularly to talk amongst ourselves, to bring this issue to the fore and to shape it in a certain way? And to begin with, I want to continue and tell a little bit of an anecdote in regard to the QDR Independent Panel, for which both Mackenzie and I helped out serving as staff. Now, that was a congressionally legislated effort, largely because members of Congress were not very well satisfied with the result of the Quadrennial Defense Review. But it was also a body of 20 members chosen by leadership, both House and Senate, Republican and Democratic leadership, but the majority of the members, the principals, were appointed by the Obama administration. So this was genuinely a bipartisan, and as Secretary William Perry, who was one of the co-chairs of it, stressed very heavily that it be a nonpartisan panel. And after doing getting some initial briefings on the QDR, the members were even less, members of the panel were even less satisfied, not only by the result, but by the process that had achieved the result. At the same time, the members knew that we didn't have the time or the resources to do a full-blown strategic review of our own, to do the threat analysis, the campaign analysis, so on and so forth. So the panel was really at a loss to describe what would be the framework by which we would try to at least describe the defense requirements for the United States now and going forward. And the solution that the panel reached is one that I would offer as something that's really a good benchmark to use over the course of time. The panel was unanimous in agreement about what the long-term security interests of the United States are. And you can read them in the summary form in the panel's report, but it's a very short list. They don't change. They don't change when parties change in the White House or on Capitol Hill, and they don't change across time. The United States needs to defend the homeland. The United States needs access to the commons, as they're called, the places where commerce is done, on the oceans, in the air, in space, and now in cyberspace. So that is always the case. And it's also been the case since World War II that the United States always cares about the balance of power in Europe, that we always care and have done since the early 19th century about the balance of power and our access in East Asia and the Asia-Pacific region. And particularly, as we have seen in the past generation, we can't be agnostic about the security situation in the greater Middle East. That began with a narrow focus on the Persian Gulf, but now we see it expanding to the Indian Ocean and South Asia. And whether you had served in a Republican or Democratic administration, whether you were a former military officer or a former executive branch appointee or former senator or legislator, these 20 people of varied backgrounds came to a unanimous decision about those core interests. I would say that regardless of what the threat level is in any one of these situations, that these are things that Americans always care about. And as we go forward and have this discussion, that provides a very good benchmark and measurement for deciding how much is enough, which is the traditional question of defense planning. Turning to the question of affordability, this is a field of study where there are numbers. Everybody's got a different set of numbers. I would argue that the main question to figure out and how to determine the question of affordability is by slice of our economy. What's the opportunity cost that we have to pay for defending ourselves? So, in an expanding economy over the last generation, it's not surprising that in absolute dollars, in relative dollars, by those measurements, the costs of our defense have risen. But at the same time, so has overall American wealth. And as a relative slice of our economy, as a share of GDP, measured as the burden that we have to pay in terms of cars we can't buy, homes that we can't improve, investments that businesses can't make, so on and so forth, the things that private citizens love to do with their money. That burden has decreased steadily over the past generation. And even today, when there's a huge expense to be paid fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, the total expenditure is less than a nickel on the American dollar. By contrast, the Cold War average was something around 7.5% of GDP over 50 years during a period of continuous economic expansion. What's changed, what makes our situation different today than, say, during the Eisenhower years, is the rise of entitlement costs, even more than domestic discretionary spending. That accounts for about 15 to 16% of GDP and more than half of federal spending. So particularly when you see others who engage in this debate, such as we see Barney Frank and Ron Paul doing, they describe the defense burden as more than 50% of domestic discretionary spending. That's numerically true, but it's entirely irrelevant. It takes entitlements out of the picture in title. And not surprisingly, if you look at the co-signers of that letter, which comprise, except for Ron Paul, the most left members of Congress, that's what they want to protect and they want to defend. Which brings me to the final subject of the politics of this issue and where we think conservatives ought to stand together. McKenzie, I think, very articulately described the constitutional role that our founders intended for the government to play in securing our liberties. Again, it's the thing that they said was mandatory. It is the role of the government. It is one of the few things that only government can do. But it is the thing that government must do and must do adequately in order for us to secure our liberties and to enjoy the blessings of freedom and prosperity as Americans. So one of the things that forced us to, or compelled us to have this event, to move it up in our sort of planning calendar, was the number of left-wing blog hits that we got in response to the op-ed that Arthur Brooks, Ed Fuller, and Bill Kristol published. And it's very clear that their strategy, 3 weeks out from an election that they don't look forward to very much, is essentially to try to divide conservatives, and in particular, to separate off Tea Party conservatives from other conservatives, and to make, as Ron Paul and Ron Wyden and Barney Frank did in their letter, to link together all government spending as though it was all equally legitimate and all equally worthwhile, and particularly in a conservative assessment of what the role of government should be, not just the size of government, but the role of government, to try to hang entitlements and domestic spending or link them together with defense spending. Not surprisingly, the military is the most popular institution of the American government, far above the Congress, far above the presidency, I believe even above the Supreme Court. And that's because in a time of war, when very few of us are sacrificing incredibly to secure not only the safety, but the prosperity and the comfy domestic life of the rest of us. We are immensely grateful for the sacrifices that these guys make. So I would offer, going forward, and we really intended this whole project essentially to be a post-November campaign. We look forward to really engaging in this discussion once we have new members of Congress, hopefully a new majority, and look forward to choosing a new commander-in-chief in 2012. Again, in a time of what is certain to be a period of persistent conflict. That defense issues of American strength and adequate defense are part of the conversation, and that conservatives return to their essential roots and back their belief in American strength with policies that bring it to fruition. So with that,